So I forgot my music stand today, and so now I have this big John MacArthur looking pulpit. I don't think he's got a bigger pulpit than this, does he? He always looks like he's, he's standing behind the boardroom table all by himself up there, that giant. Look at this. This is amazing. But, here we are. Thank you for filling in with the recipe stand. It makes a fine music stand. And the pulpit, we'll have to get video. We'll have to get some kind of image of that to put up online. People out there can see just how magnificent this looks. So here we are out in the smoke again, and we're going to be smoked like a good brisket by the time this is all over. We're going to be delicious.
That's why the bees like it.
Yeah, that's why the bees like us. That's why they're out here. But we will be moving back inside the next couple weeks for all those out there in the interweb land. We'll keep you posted on that. It's been a minute since we've been together again, right? We were combined with City Church last week, doing an online service. And last time we were together, we saw that Jesus had gotten arrested, that he was bound. They really didn't need to cuff him, but they did. It's kind of protocol. If you get arrested today, they're going to put you in handcuffs because they just do. And so they arrested him. They cuffed him. Peter had a little flare up and cut a guy's ear off. That was fun. Malchus is all, keep an ear to the ground, okay? See what I did there? And then Jesus was arrested, carted back down the hill and up into Jerusalem to Annas. And we talked about what that meant, how Annas was really not a great character. His name means one who gives clemency, one who's merciful, and he really wasn't so much that. And he was the high priest, we found out 15 years before, and that the Romans came in and removed him, worked out some kind of agreement where Annas was still picking the high priest, so several of his sons had been high priest, and his son-in-law now was actually the high priest, Caiaphas, but a lot of people still regarded Annas as the real high priest. So they take him to Annas first. And it just shows that the way they'd arrested him, the way they were looking to get rid of Jesus, who they were taking him to, when they were taking him to him, shows that there was zero prospect of any kind of fair trial that was going to happen here. And that's kind of where we left off last time. So today we pick it up in John chapter 18, verse 15, where it says, Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. So we have Peter, we know Peter's there, and another disciple, and we can assume that's John. That's kind of John's MO, the way he refers to himself. At the table at the Last Supper, he was the one whom Jesus loved. He was really hesitant to throw his name into it, or that was me. It was I, John. He just uses these other cryptic things, and I think it's kind of humble that he just doesn't really mention himself by name when he's there. So it was Peter, and then there was another disciple, which was probably John, that were following Jesus. There are those that are critical of John and Peter in this story, saying, if you actually, heard somebody saying in one of the audio commentaries I was listening to, that if you follow Jesus from a distance, it's not good, man. That's when those bad things happen. But they followed. And where were the other guys? These guys were there. And it's not like they were following at a distance. That we see that John enters in with Jesus into the courtyard. And so they were kind of right there with them, and nobody else was. It's just these two guys that followed them into this kind of scary scenario. This was not a fun thing to be walking into, but they followed. And I think that's important. They were scared, they were unsure, and yet they followed. And I think that's, if we follow Jesus, and even if we're going to see, Peter kind of blowing it, but they were there. And even if you follow from a distance, just keep following. If the best you can do is follow from 20 feet behind, keep following, keep going where Jesus is going. Even if it's scary, even if it's intimidating, even if it looks like the end of days for the whole thing. Keep following Jesus. And I love that about these guys. So I'm not going to be too critical of them because they were there. They showed up. They followed Jesus back down the hill. They already did the one night hike down into the Kidron Valley, across the creek and up to the other side. And now they're making a night hike back down and back up into Jerusalem. And so they followed. And John went with Jesus into the courtyard. So it's not like he was like hiding behind a tree. You know, he was pretty bold. He stayed with Jesus. He went with Jesus into the courtyard. And we know that because this word with in the original language, to go in with, means enter together. It occurs twice in the New Testament. Both of them are in the Gospel of John. And it occurs here and in John 6:22, where, you know, the guys got into the boat without Jesus. They went out into the Sea of Galilee. Big storm whips up, and they get to the other side, and there were people there that like walked around the lake to meet him, and Jesus was on the boat, and they know that Jesus did not enter the boat with them, and it's that same word. So they were it's like going in together, and so we know that John went in together with Jesus. He was close by, and this is dangerous right now. And so they gained access. Not anybody could go in. This was the courtyard of the high priest. You had to be a somebody to get in. And says that this other disciple, John, was known to the high priest. And we don't know quite what that is. John doesn't spell out the details, but it's probably either through business, through some kind of marital tie. I've heard it said that John's dad, Zebedee, had, you know, he was big-time fisherman, had a pretty good business going in town, and that the high priest may have shopped and bought his fish, and so they kind of knew each other. So John was able to get in where other people could, and Peter had to stay outside. It's like, not you, riffraff, you outside. And so John goes in, calls for the servant, gets the servant girl who's keeping the gate, and arranges then to let Peter in as well. Verse 17. You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you? She asked Peter. You kind of get the snarky tone in that. He replied, I am not. It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. So the servant girl questions Peter. Like, John goes in and is like, hey, this guy out here, he's okay to come in. Can you go let him in? She's like, yeah, whatever. And she goes out. It's like, oh, you're not one of this guy's disciples too, are you? There's like a snarky tone there. Snarky question from the lowest person in the organization. So that tells you something about how they felt about the disciples. Plus, we don't know anything about this girl. I mean, she was a woman. She was a young woman. She was the servant who kept the door. And, you know, so she was kind of a nobody in the organization. And she's giving Peter crap. So it's like, you're not one of them too, are you? And we don't know who she was. I mean, I'm sure she's like, you know, I'm supposed to be off shift like 2 hours ago, and this is going to be a long night. And, you know, just going to tell you that. And, you know, it was night. It was late. She was probably tired, probably wanted to go to sleep, get off work. And there's all this other hubbub now going on, and she's still there keeping the door. And as I was looking at this, I'm like, how interesting. We have this servant girl who was a hireling monitoring the door to keep the riffraff out. Because, you know, only people who were good enough to be in the high priest courtyard could go into the high priest courtyard. The other riffraff had to stay outside. So she was keeping the riffraff out. And then we have Jesus, who is the shepherd, who is the gate of the sheep pen, monitoring the door to let the riffraff in. I just like that contrast. You know, we have her keeping everybody out, and Jesus in his kingdom is the door, and he's letting the riffraff in. And then once in, he's growing them, he's protecting them, he's giving them safe quarter to be, and he's feeding them and caring for them. I just love that contrast. And so this probably was not the best or easiest time to be a disciple. So she's like, are you one of this guy's disciples too? And Peter's like, nope, not me. One denial down, 2 to go. We're going to get to the other 2 next week probably. Just like Jesus had predicted, you know, back in chapter 13. And Peter's like, Lord, where are you going? I want to go. And Jesus is like, do you really know what you're asking for? right now. You can't go where I'm going. And he's like, I would die for you. I would lay down my life for you. I will go with you anywhere. And Jesus is like, Peter, verily I say unto thee, you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. Peter's probably like, whatever. And I'm sure that's, he's got so much swimming in his mind, he's not even thinking about that just yet at this moment. But it was a hard time to be a disciple. Things were like, the rug was just literally been pulled out from under these guys as Jesus was arrested. And Peter had a reason to walk back his boldness. Right? Remember in the garden when the arrest came, he whipped out his sword and it's like, oh, I'll show you. And, lops the guy's ear off. He had a reason to walk back his boldness now because Jesus had been arrested. Jesus is like, Peter, no, we're going to put that ear back on, and send him on his way. Now Jesus is arrested. There's like all these officials and all this hubbub going on. Even the servant girl is being kind of mean to them. There's like this really hostile vibe toward the disciples and Jesus right now. So he may have been timid at this point. Might have been a little ashamed, intimidated, scared. He did just cut off the ear of the high priest servant. And this was like, just hours before. And so that servant could have been there, And we're going to find out later that a relative of that servant was and recognized him from the garden. So it's like, this is all, it's like, what's the statute of limitations on cutting off an ear if it gets put back on? Are you good like 2 hours out from that? Am I still going to have to kind of worry about being taken into custody on this assault charge? So yeah, probably a little timid, ashamed, intimidated, scared. And now we find him isolated, and it looks like him and John kind of got split up, so he's isolated in the high priest's courtyard. So this was not a good selfie moment for Peter. It's like, hey, Rabbi's been arrested, just cut a guy's ear off, and now I'm right here with all the guys that are trying to kill my Savior and Lord. Not a good Facebook selfie moment. And so, things are changed. He's kind of walked back on that boldness a little bit now. And then it says, it was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Their climate, remember this is like Passover time, so it's spring, and their climate is much the same as ours. And in the springtime, it can get a little cool at night, right? They've got a Mediterranean climate that's much the same as ours, and it gets a little cold, and somebody lights a fire, and man, when it's cold and there's a fire going, people kind of gravitate toward the fire. And so Peter gathered round with everybody and warmed himself at the fire. And why was Peter at the fire? Well, number one, it was cold. He was warming himself up. And then possibly he wanted to, this might help him blend in, to help him kind of hide in plain sight, if you will, to not stand out. Because if he didn't go hang around the fire and everybody else was at the fire, and he's like hanging back, over by the tree, they're like, what's up with that guy? Who's he? Creeper, what's he doing just hanging out there? So he might have been trying to hide in plain sight, just be with everybody else, blend in. I don't know what was going on in his head, but he was cold and he was at the fire. And Peter is criticized also for warming himself at the fire of his enemies. And I don't know, if it's cold and there's a fire, I don't know that I fault him a whole lot for that. But if you're going to warm yourself at the fire with other people, I think you got to be honest about who you are. And when people ask, you don't want to lie to them. If you're there and there's a bunch of unbelievers warming around the fire, and everywhere we go, kind of the equivalent at work. Now I'm back at work. They gave me a desk right next to the water cooler. That's kind of like the fire in the office corporate environment, right? Everybody comes to the water cooler. They come by and people talk and yip yap, and I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of lucky because all I got to do is like spin my chair around, and I get to see everybody coming by, and I like the water cooler. It's refreshing, and just not everybody there believes like I do. Trust me. And I think when you're there, you just got to be ready to give an honest answer, and you just let the chips fall where they may. Had one of them last night. It's like, so, well, where's your church you serve at? So I got to give her the spiel, and And I didn't tell her she had to come or she was going to go to hell. Just kind of gave her an honest, straightforward answer about it, what it is and what we do. And she's like, oh, cool. Showed her a couple pictures. So I don't know that I fault Peter all that much for being at the fire. You got to be careful, though, warming yourself at the fire of the enemy. Sometimes we can go warm ourselves at the fire of the other side, and we will get sucked into the other side. We just have to be true to who we are. Keep following Jesus. Answer honestly when people ask. Just be real. And Peter did not do that. It's like, aren't you one of these? And he's like, no, not me. Then in verse 19, meanwhile, not far away, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. So Jesus is questioned by Annas. You ever been in front of a judge, sent to the principal's office? This whole thing is just intimidating to begin with. When there's, the important people and, they're usually sitting up higher than you and they're looking down at you. And I've been in front of a judge before, not because I did anything wrong, but it's just intimidating. Even if you're not there because you did anything wrong, you're just in there and like your blood pressure probably goes up a little bit just because of the situation. Going to the principal's office, I shared with you guys, I forget why, but about when we tried to impeach the class president in the 5th grade. And we got called into the principal's office, a little intimidating. He wanted to hear what we had to say, and they weren't really happy with us. So it's intimidating to begin with. Or have you ever been set up in a situation like that to incriminate yourself where you're just guilty? They know you're guilty. You're going to be guilty no matter what. And that's what had happened. I remember we had this substitute teacher in the 6th grade. Why do I remember some of these details? What did I do yesterday? I don't know. Let me tell you about the 6th grade. When it was Mr. Anderson's class. See, the details. And reading class. It's all right there. Having a good moment today. Mr. Anderson's reading class, and he was gone, brought in this substitute, and we go in, and there's this guy that looks like, was it Milton from Office Space with the thick glasses? Yeah. Looked kind of like that, only with way crazier hair and crazier eyes. I'm like, whoa. So we go in, and this guy had like some kind of, I don't know what happened to him that day, but he was angry. And so I'm just like going to keep a low profile, right? So I'm just sitting there. We had our assigned reading. I'm just going to read, right? He comes up and pulls my book down. You shouldn't be reading like that. Name on the board with a check mark. That's detention. I'm like, okay. So by the end of the class, I think there were maybe like 2 or 3 people in the class that did not have detention. Because he was just handing out detention like he was an angry man. And so we went in, after Mr. Anderson came back to make our case. He's like, I know, I heard. You guys, none of you are going to have to serve that. There was justice, right? But that substitute kind of set us up to fail. It's like we were all guilty, and he was going to make sure we paid the price for being guilty of something. And, that happens. And that's what was happening to Jesus now. He sent into Annas. They are going to prove him guilty. He is guilty. There is no chance of him being proven innocent. And so Annas questions Jesus. He asks him about his disciples and his teaching. Now, they had an equivalent back then to taking the fifth. You did not have to incriminate yourself and testify against yourself unless you were Jesus before Annas in the middle of the night. Annas says, so, tell us why you're guilty. Tell us what you're guilty of. And Jesus says in verse 20, I have spoken openly to the world. Jesus replied, I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they will know what I said. Perfectly legitimate answer. And it just shows the way that Jesus was being approached, the way he was being. This was not a trial. This was an interrogation. This was an inquisition. They were going to find him guilty. And just shows what a farce these hearings were. And there were going to be, and John doesn't cover them all, but there were going to be 6 separate hearings in the space of less than 18 hours coming up here. So it's going to be a long night for everybody. Everybody's going to be up all night long. Jesus is going to keep getting shuttled around to different authorities. And they were just going to make sure he was guilty. They say the wheels of justice turn slow, but the wheels of injustice and vengeance usually speed along at a pretty good clip, don't they? So Jesus responds, and first of all, he protected his disciples. Annas asked him about the disciples and about his doctrine. And he did not throw the disciples under the bus. He didn't even bring them up. He was taking everything on himself, didn't implicate them or cast blame on them at all. And this would have been a good opportunity for that. It's like, funny you mention those disciples. Those guys, they're the problem. You better go round them up and let me off the hook, because, man, I wouldn't trust those guys. Now, he didn't do that. He was protecting them because it was, he said that they would not be touched in all this during this time. So Jesus says, I spoke openly out in public where you all were listening. Jesus was never like in his secret Jesus bunker, right? Imparting, like some secret society, like the Jesus Illuminati, imparting the information in secret handshakes to the chosen few. He was out in the temple. He was out in the synagogues. He was out and about saying things in front of people. The Pharisees oftentimes would show up to listen to him. I mean, they were there. They knew what he said. And they're looking for him to incriminate himself now. So Jesus says, I was out where y'all were listening. Call some witnesses. Call somebody who was there. Let them testify, because that was his right. And there was no shortage of witnesses to call. And had this trial been a real trial, they would have taken the time to hear them out. Think about the witnesses they could have called. The Samaritan woman, the paralytic man at the pool, right? And what would they have said? It's like they gave the big inquisition to the paralytic at the pool. It's like, I don't know, man. How about Lazarus, Mary and Martha? Those would have been some good witnesses to call. Mary and Martha, Lazarus was dead, and Lazarus was like, yes, I was dead, and now I'm kind of here again, walking around. So, this guy's pretty awesome. He raised me from the dead. These would have been good witnesses to call. But calling and hearing the testimony of witnesses didn't fit the narrative they needed to build in a hurry. This was like a rush job. They were going to find him guilty. They needed to get him out of the way politically. And had they called and heard these witnesses, they would have gotten much more of the real Jesus than they wanted to hear. It would have just roadblocked what they were trying to do. So the way they were running this as an inquisition was also coupled with the fact that judgments were not permitted at night. And judgments were not permitted on the eve of festivals. And we're kind of in both zones right now. It's Passover, right? And it's at night. They're making, the way they were making Jesus a criminal was criminal. It was violating their own justice system. So again, no chance of a fair trial. And there they are. Jesus is right in the middle of it, and John's kind of there. Man, this is terrible. I'm sure if we could go back, there would be things I would like to add to the testimony about Jesus. Like, call me as a witness. He's been so good to me. Let me tell you about what he's done for me. And I'm sure we'd all have those things we would like to say in his defense. But Jesus was in control. Remember, they arrested him. He allowed himself to be arrested. He was bound by love and duty to his people, by the forgiveness that he was going to offer, the once and for all atonement, covering of sin. And that's what was binding him up. That's what was keeping him there. And it was his time, and he knew that. And he was in charge of that at this point, not them. So verse 22, when Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So after Jesus answers this, and it was totally legitimate, it's like, call some witnesses. This is the way it's done. Jesus was very sharp, very well versed in the law. Jesus, being the Almighty in human flesh, that handed down the Ten Commandments and the law, was pretty well versed in this stuff, and he knew the rules, he knew the regulations, he knew the justice system. He's like, call some witnesses, because it is right. Have them tell you what I did. And this guy comes up and just slaps him in the face with an open hand. That's like the worst. Slapping someone in the face is about as belittling as it gets. I've only had that happen a couple times in my life. Both of them were women. Not that I was, I'm not doing anything creepy or anything, but one of them was my mom. And Gordon tells the story of when I was mouthing off to my mom, senior in high school, starting to spread my wings and fly out of the nest. I got a little mouthy with Mom while she was doing the dishes, and my friend tells the story of the suds like spraying into the air as her hand came out and dropped me. So, and there I am, Mr. Tough Guy, spreading my wings. Yeah, I'm going to graduate, going to go to college and take on the world, and I'll be ruling everything in 4 or 5 years, That arrogant high school senior attitude. There I am sitting on the ground. Very belittling, very humbling. It's about the worst thing that can happen. It's probably better just to get straight up punched in the face than slapped. Slapping just carries that extra element of insult with it, right? So slaps him in the face. Totally belittling. So, because frustration had broken out. They brought Jesus in to trip him up, to do the Inquisition thing. And they still do. I watch enough crime TV where I've seen like innocent people, and if the law wants them to be guilty, they'll put them in that room and they'll just start grilling them and drilling them for hours and hours until they just are broken down and they'll admit to something they didn't do. It can happen. They were looking to do that to Jesus, to get him to admit to something he wasn't, and he's like, no, this is not how it goes. You need to call some witnesses. And he was right. And, well, you feel the frustration breaking out. And so the guy slaps him and is like, this is how you talk to the high priest. You should respect the high priest. And then Jesus questions, or rather he cross-examines the servant that just slapped him. I love this. If I said something wrong, will you testify as to what I said wrong? But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? So if I said something wrong, you testify. If not, why are you mad, bro? Right? Why you slap me? It's not cool. And so then Jesus remained bound. It was sent off to Caiaphas. Now this is still going to be kind of an unresolved thing. Maybe next week. Last week was kind of a cliffhanger. The last time we were together, bit of a cliffhanger. Kind of the same here. And next week we'll finish up with Peter completing his denial process, and we'll continue the courtroom drama with Jesus. And so we see here, though, just the injustice that was being done. Sometimes life isn't fair. Big surprise there, huh? We attended a service yesterday for a guy who was just short of his 37th birthday, who was with his dad when he passed away on a motorcycle. I can't imagine. I'm looking at that, I'm like, man, as a father, to sit there with your son while he passes. And somebody brought up a beautiful point about that it was an honor for him to be there while his son closed his eyes in this life and opened his eyes in the next with Jesus. And when you think about that, that's kind of beautiful. But man, parents shouldn't have to do that. Parents shouldn't have to hold their dying children. That's not, every time I see something like that, and oh man, stillborn children and sick children and the parents holding their children while they pass away, it's not fair. That angers me. And I kind of shake my fist at God. Oh my God, you don't get it. It's not fair. And Jesus, let me tell you about not fair. Let me tell you about this farce of a trial that I went through. I know life isn't fair. And it just doesn't have to be. Jesus knows about that, and he's with us in those things that aren't fair. When we're crying not fair, Jesus is right there with us. He knows. Sometimes people get mistreated. Here's a big bomb drop, right? Sometimes people get mistreated by the church. And we sit there like, man, that's not cool. I'm just going to walk away from the whole thing. Well, here's Jesus is like, oh yeah? Let me tell you about getting mistreated by the church. Because the high priest, all these guys, they were the church leadership of the time. And they had these protocols for fair trials that they were not following because they were just trying to get rid of Jesus. He's like, let me tell you about the church mistreating you. I know. I'm right in there with you. So I think as we walk away today, we look at this and this travesty of justice that was falling on Jesus. That we look around at things in our own lives when things are, we're mistreated by people who should be looking out for us, when we're suffering any kind of injustice, whether it's big, whether it's little, whether it's getting passed over at work for a promotion, or, there's like so many different things. We're like, well, that's not equitable, We'll stand here and I will say that is not equitable. And Jesus is like, yeah, I know. I've been in those situations, and, I'll be right here with you. It's going to be all right. Follow me. Just keep following me. If you get mad and you follow me from 20 feet back, just keep following, right? If you just like bail, come back. I will let you come back. And so I think that's something we can take with us today out of this. So we'll pray, we'll do one more song, and we'll go on our smoky way. Lord, we thank you again for your word. And as we're getting into getting out of the deep principles of what was shared with the disciples on that last night, like so much deep stuff there. And we're getting into more of a narrative now of the trial and the courtroom drama and everything that surrounded it. We thank you that there are things here that just show your character. As we're going to find out that John, our author, doesn't cover all the details, but he covers the ones that he intentionally sets out to, because he's painting a picture of you that we can look at and know your character. And Lord, we just pray that as we look at this and see the gentleness, see the just the lack of anger and being emotional with these guys as they were flaring up and being emotional, that we would be able to take that character for ourselves. We would seek to be that. When people treat us unjustly, when people are mean to us, when life just deals us kind of a bum hand sometimes, that we'll know that you were there as well. And that a great deal of the reason of why you came and put on human flesh was to be with us, Emmanuel, God with us. And that you don't leave us, you don't forsake us, that you know what it's like to walk around in human skin, to be tired, to be hungry, to experience pain, soreness, to experience the injustice wrapped up in human skin. And we thank you that we have that as an advocate alongside of us. So Lord, wherever we're at today, we just pray that we would welcome you in to whatever it is we're going through. If times are good, please help us to welcome you in to the good times. Sometimes we don't do that. The good times come and we're on top of the world and we feel like we don't really need you. We're doing pretty good. And help us to welcome you into those times as well, because we know there's mountaintops, there are also valleys, and where there are valleys, there will be mountaintops. Where there's a valley of the shadow of death, that there will be green pastures and a table before our enemies. And Lord, we just pray that we welcome you into anything, all the pain and anything we're in today. Pain, sorrow, good times, joy, exuberance. Come be with us in it and help us to follow. Lord, even if we come to a place where we just can't and we just bail out altogether, that we would come back. The other disciples were nowhere to be seen in this narrative, and they came back. And we just thank you for your grace that allows for that. And Lord, go with us this week. Again, help us just to be lights burning out in the darkness. It's dark and perilous times. And help us to be good ambassadors for you out there. Help us to be gentle, to be loving, to be forgiving, to be gracious, to exhibit all those characters that we see here. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.